Hi guys, my name is Brett with Death Angle Whitewater, and I am also the new lead instructor for the new Whitewater Instructional School community. Check that out if you haven't seen it yet, but this is my first video for that community. We're going to go in, we're going to talk about a couple things. My first video, just generically, I want to talk about is rafting safe? Okay, this is a question that I see all the time on the internet. It's always posted all over Facebook groups or Reddit communities, people dropping in to see if it's safe. People are just generally concerned on whether or not it is safe for them to go out on the river and take these trips. The short answer is yes. The whitewater rafting is safe. Like I said, that's a short answer. So let's kind of dive into a couple things here, talking more or less about what makes it safer or less safe. Okay. Now there's generally two different kinds of rafting, just outwardly big, ballpark stuff. You have your commercial rafting and you have your private rafting, right? Now let's talk about commercial rafting first. Commercial rafting is very, very safe. Statistically speaking, if I remember right, there was about 4 million people going rafting in the United States a year. And we only get about 2 to 10 on a bad year commercial deaths. And now you say, oh my God, 10 people a year, that's crazy, but that's not very common. Usually we're sitting around 4 or 5 a year, 2 on a good year, like I said. Now here's the thing, almost all of those deaths that occur on commercial rafting trips come from two things. One of them being high water and the other one being pre-existing health conditions. People falling in the water and having a heart attack because they were already not generally healthy enough to go rafting, right? Now it's sad that happens, but is that really necessarily rafting's fault? Only partially, right? So, if you look at it just over if you look at it generally like that, it is pretty safe. Now there's a couple things that you need to make sure of before, you just say, hey, this is completely safe, right? Is this a real company? Do they have all the proper equipment? Are their guides properly trained? I'm going to tell you that if a company has the insurance, the river permits, and a reputable name, they're going to have all this stuff done. All of these guides are trained up to pretty stringent standards. Some states actually have requirements, like state standards, for the level of guide training. So they have to go through a certain number of trips, and then they have to take a test at the state level to actually get their license to be guides. Not all the states require that. But it's just one of those things. If it helps put you at ease about going rafting, you should know that. All right, let's turn over and talk more about private rafting. Now, private rafting also can be very safe. This is out rafting without a commercial company, right? Without a commercial outfitter. So you're going out with your friend or a friend of a friend, or something along those lines. Now, the difference is the kind of rules and standards that people apply to themselves for these trips, right? But still, overall, if everything is done right, private rafting is still very safe. And I want to just start there. If your guide is properly experienced and knows what they're doing, if you have the proper gear on, right? PFD, helmet, if the water's cold or the air's cold, do you have a wetsuit, splash gear, dry suit, that kind of stuff? These are the kind of things that can keep private rafting very, very safe. Now, aside from the proper gear, you want to make sure that your guide knows what they're doing, right? Your guide isn't, some guy who was a commercial guide in the 80s and has been on a total of 3 trips since then, and he's taking you down a class 5, right? That would be pretty scary, in my opinion. I wouldn't want to be in that raft. So talk to your guide, figure out who they are, where they've been, what they've done. Stuff like that can really set your mind at ease. Typically what I would want to see is multiple trips a year for that guide, or having known this particular section that they're taking you down pretty well over a long period of time. Water levels change, that kind of stuff, rivers change. So, consistent familiarity with a section or a really high guide knowledge, somebody who can read and run a new river without having to do a lot of scouting or knowing much about it is generally going to be a pretty safe person. However, doing things like scouting or learning the river beforehand is always a big plus. Questions to ask your guide for these private trips. We already kind of talked about the experience, right? Were you a commercial guide? Were you were you a private guide? Have you ever taken classes? Are you Swiftwater Rescue certified? These kind of things are really helpful to know. Are they familiar with the current boat that they're in? Is it their raft? Is it a borrowed raft? Is it a rented raft? Do they know how to row? How much experience rowing do they have? Did they learn how to paddle guide and have never really rowed before? Because there are some people out there like that. Okay, here's a couple things to think about and keep in mind for private trips to keep them safer. High water is always more dangerous, so that's one of those things that if you need to look at the water levels, talk to the guide about the water levels. I'm not saying that high water means that you shouldn't go rafting, but it's always just a little extra something to think about, that high water is always more dangerous for whitewater rafting. One of the next things that you need to watch for are inexperienced guides or overconfident guides, right? If they were a rookie last year and they're really gung-ho, they really want to do more, sometimes these either inexperienced or overconfident people can be worrisome on the river. And that doesn't mean that you're going to die, but that means that you might not have a great trip. So it's something to keep an eye on and watch for, right? On top of that, you need to make sure that your guide isn't getting intoxicated while you're out there on the river, right? Marijuana and alcohol are pretty common in the river community. And in my opinion, a little bit of dabbling is fine, but your guide should never be intoxicated on the river. They should never be drunk or stoned while they're guiding a boat. All right, guys, I hope that video was short enough and to the point on whether or not rafting is safe. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will have another video on the school community here soon. Thank you.